There are some kind of
final seminar speaker of the semester or this academic year. And I'm excited to introduce him about that he went to your reporter like I just I'm gonna let Pat introduce him, but I want you have the poster session next week down in the hot seat lobby, so I hope everybody can join and see some of the great work that grad students are doing.
And before I introduce our speaker, I just want to thank Thea and everybody who works to organize this seminar every semester, especially the grad students who help out. Seminar is a really critical part of the department. We're here to learn from each other. We're here to learn from our projects, and seminars are a big way that we do that. These are not trivial in the amount of time that it takes to organize these, run them, set them up, find speakers, get them traveled, do all those other things. So we really appreciate everything everybody does. We've been on that for so many years. So thank you for that. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, a good friend of mine, Ahjond. And so Ahjond was kind enough to send me a bio, so I didn't have to write one at the last minute, so it'll be a little bit more accurate probably than if I had to do it. So Ahjond is a research scientist with the US EPA. Right now stationed in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Follow him on Instagram. You can see there's a little fishing down there every now and then from what I've seen. Pretty good pictures. Seems like there's some good fish. Pretty good. Yeah. So he's also a fellow at the Utrecht Center for Water, Ocean Sustainability Law at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He's an associated faculty in the Department of Environmental Sciences at Emory in Atlanta. And he's also an adjunct professor and fellow at the Center for Resilience and Agricultural Working Landscapes at the University of Nebraska. Ahjond has a PhD in policy studies from here at Clemson University, where he worked with Craig Allen in the co-op unit. I was on his committee, and Jeff Allen was as well, who's here. Thanks, Jeff, for coming over. He's also got a JD from Florida State University College of Law, an MS in Wildlife Ecology from the University of Florida, where he was also with the co-op unit, worked with Franklin Percival there, and a BA in Anthropology from Emory University. He's going to be talking to you today about some of his transdisciplinary research, which is focused on governance of social ecological systems. Ahjond has been incredibly productive in scientific career, publishing over 100 peer-reviewed papers, 3 journal special features, 3 books, including a recent one entitled Applied Anarchy that he edited just last year. So with that, today's speaker, Ahjond, thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Glad to
man.
have you here.
I like anarchy better. Yeah. Okay. Well, hi guys. Thanks for having me. So today I'm going to talk about this. It's I realize it's kind of obtuse, but I'll try to explain it in ways that I think are useful. It has this title, but there's another way to say it too. You could say, "Who wants to hear about Cleveland?" Right? So you're going to hear about Cleveland. That's really the story. Let's see.
Well, you have to click out. You just have to click somewhere on the screen to get it.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's called Zoom train.
Not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the best way I think to differentiate these things and help you understand for those who don't understand resilience or know about it. Okay, so there's preservation, right? I think most are probably familiar with that. That's a really strong concept of the law in particular. And a good example of that is the national parks in the United States, right? You're trying to keep things as they are, static, right? Then you have mitigation, and that's return to what they were. And you can think of like endangered species politics, right? You might have, say, like 100 salt marsh voles, right? And you're trying to get to 1,000. So you're trying to mitigate that back to that particular historical baseline, right? Which becomes more and more challenging moving forward. I'll talk about a bit more about that moving forward. Okay, then now let's get to the resilience stuff in terms of like the factors that or the concepts that really matter. Because when you talk about the type of resilience I'm talking about, it's made up of adaptation, which is adjusting the system to current conditions, right? An example would be like, you know, protecting and constructing wetlands in coastal areas. Okay. And you can probably think of that. That's happening like Louisiana, coastal South Carolina, I'm sure, Florida, big time. And so that's, you're trying to keep it within the same regime or the same state, right? And I know that's like in technical terms, okay, so think you're trying to keep the beach town looking like it pretty much does, but you're going to protect wetlands, you're going to construct wetlands, you're adapting to the changing conditions, okay? Then you've got transformation. And this is the flip side of the ecological, social ecological resilience concept. And transformation means that you're deliberately shifting the system to a new state, right? And this is in response to accelerating environmental change, climate change. And so an example of this, and this is one that I'll tell you about more in a bit, is taking, shifting water and sewer infrastructure from gray, which is just pipes in the ground, to green, which is going to be things like rain gardens and constructed wetlands and urban ag, whatever. I'll tell you more about that later. A whole bunch of different things. And so in that sense, how do you know it's a transformation? Because you're changing processes and structures. In this case, the structures you're changing is the water infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure. That's the slow variable, right? That's your slow variable. The process, what are you changing? You're changing the hydrologic cycle. And the way, and so then what's your indicator? Water quality. Okay. Okay, so environmental research and rulemaking. Okay, classically, how has it worked? Well, you identify a goal, right? Like the number of an endangered species that you are trying to mitigate back to. And so then you optimize the management of that resource. That's historically how we've done it in the US, a lot of places around the world too. But I'm going to speak to it really because that's my background, my training, environmental law in the US. Particularly endangered species act, I used to know quite well. I don't know as well as I used to, so if you have any questions, we'll see. But the problem with that is you're optimizing your management on, say, like a single species, right? Say like the salt marsh vole, right? In a larger, salt marsh ecosystem. So what is happening is that as you optimize on that one species, you're likely causing undesirable consequences for the entire ecosystem, right? It's a noble cause, it's flawed, and it limits its ability to manage the ecosystem. I'll give you another quick example from my sea turtle work back in the day. In 10,000 Islands, which is in Southwest Florida, there's mangroves, so you know what they are, the walking trees in salty areas. So that area, there was really 10,000 little mangrove islands. And turtles, sea turtles like to nest on them, loggerheads in particular, some green turtles. And so we were tasked with, because raccoons, the top level native predator in the mangrove ecosystem at the time, was eating all the sea turtles, or they were eating all the sea turtles. So Fish and Wildlife Service and the Endangered Species Act said, look, this is too far out, too remote a location for us to do any type of caging or things of this nature you can do in like more populated areas, like they do at Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. You can cage nests because it's easy to get to. This is too difficult to get to, too challenging to do caging, that sort of thing. So it's basically like, what's the best way we can do this? Get rid of raccoons. Okay, so that's what we did. But that got me thinking, one, I didn't want to do that anyway. And then, but that's how I got the Sea Turtle project. Anyway, so then I started thinking about, well, this is going to cause a whole host of other issues. We never assessed that, but that's when I started thinking about this type of stuff. Like, this is not, a systems perspective. This is not a way to manage. Anyway, so what was that? Okay, so does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. I lost my place now. Systems perspective. Yeah, okay, we're good. You got questions about that? I'll tell you. Okay, so this lack of a systems perspective, right? So you have these things called cumulative impacts. And hopefully this example helps with that, and like what I just told you about. Because one of the things is that by taking out the raccoons, that I forgot there was one more piece. Ghost crabs are down there. And ghost crabs eat sea turtle eggs and nests. And guess what? Raccoons eat ghost crabs. So guess what? Ghost crab numbers, we never did this. They're all next year. There are ghost crabs everywhere. So do we really have any positive impact? I can't say, because I saw still nest still, being the ghost crabs can't dig the nest, but what they would do is they would wait for the turtles to come out, then they pick them up. So anyway, so who knows? Maybe it was just complete failure, but it got me thinking that this is not, and that's not the way to go, right? That you need to have this systems perspective, and that was a big jump for me personally, because I studied anthropology. A lot of you folks probably studied ecology, biology, forest, whatever. Maybe you got some of this systems perspective. I did. I mean, I studied anthropology and primatologist, and I shifted gears. So cumulative impacts have this capacity to scale up. And what does that mean? Okay, so let's think everybody in this room has an acre, right? And you have each of us has an acre, and then like a quarter of it has like wetlands on it, right? But then you say, you know what? I'm going to put in like a sandbox for my kids, or like a barbecue pit, or a fire pit, or a shed, maybe a new garage, whatever. So you think no big deal, right? Well, that's not true. You're getting this wetlands degradation, you get this numerous small conversions that we all think don't matter, and you get death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, this could hopefully this kind of frames up. I'm sure you probably get it anyway, but hopefully this helps you get the more of a systems perspective. And so this cumulative effect of all those small conversions can manifest into large scale degradation of the ecosystem that starts associated with wetlands. All right, so let's talk about resilience. What is it? Okay, so there's a bunch of different kinds. That's part of the problem. Okay, there's resilience in psychology. That's not what I'm talking about. I don't even know what that is. But there's resilience in engineering. Okay, I kind of get that. I'm not, math is not a real strong suit for me, but that's basically just rate of return time. That's not what we're talking about. Although that is subsumed under the kind we're talking about, ecological, which means that you can have multiple configurations of systems. The classic examples are lakes that exist in clear or algae. I know that's not the technical term. Was it neutral effect, ligature effect? So the aquatic help me. Anyway, what clear and algae, right? I'm still trying. My ecology's is still there a little bit. It's okay. You'll work out. And then say coral reefs. You've got live coral, right? And then you get too much phosphorus. You're losing your herbivores, and boom, flips over to reefs. Those are classic examples of multiple regimes of systems. Grasslands in the US is happening now. Actually, all of North America, the Great Plains are being shifted over, being invaded by red cedar, right? Because fire regimes have not been maintained as they were historically. We've been suppressing fire. Hopefully that makes sense. So the ecosystems can exist in multiple regimes, right? I think psychologists are wrong, because I would say that mental health needs multiple regimes too, but hey, we won't argue with them today. So what that means then is the type I'm talking about, ecological resilience, which is derived from the ecologist Buzz Holland, paper in 1973, I can point you to if you haven't seen it. It's an emergent property of social ecological systems. What is that? It's an ecosystem. The social part is just, we try to bring humans in, because historically, at least, humans were seen as separate from ecosystems, which is ridiculous, because humans have direct or indirect influence on every ecosystem or every part of this planet. And I talk about adaptation and transformation. Those are subsumed under social ecological resilience. That's the important part here. And so what is emergent property? It sounds fancy. No, it's not. Think about it, right? It's okay. Say if I cut my arm, if I scratch it a little bit like that, it's already gone. Why? Well, because this living system has this inherent capacity to recover and to persist, right? And the Earth has the same capacity at multiple scales. And nobody told me to do it. I didn't tell it to do it. It just happens. It's self-organization. Okay, so now different strategies for managing resilience. Okay, one is adaptive management. This, no surprise, was also developed by Buzz Holland and colleagues. I think 1978 when they came out with this, but it's been fleshed out more so and used in other areas since then. And the most important part about adaptive management when you're dealing with ecosystems is you have the two key criteria are necessary. I mean, you can do adaptive management in pretty much any situation, but it's probably going to fail. It's probably not the appropriate method or management strategy in that circumstance, right? We need high uncertainty, right? And high controllability of management interventions. Those are the two, criteria you have to have. Then you can put in a structured iterative process. That's what it is. And that's really the important part, where you have monitoring of the, the ecosystem, and then those the aspects that information and data feeds back into the management process at decision points. And so because of that, you can learn through time. It's not just like collecting data, doing nothing with it, or monitoring, doing nothing with it. It's in a structured iterative process. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times I see that a lot of data is collected, or there's no monitoring strategy put in place. And so it's not really useful. I mean, and I'll tell you that from my perspective, from a law and policy perspective, if you're going to do things that way as an ecologist or a forester or whatever, it's not really that useful. You're going to be frustrated. So think of it in terms of how can I design my management plan so that you can, have the data, monitoring data, feedback into the process through time. Okay, and adaptive governance then it's a broader than that. The management, it's like managing the actual ecosystem, and the governance deals more with the social aspect in terms of like the organizational, and all the way from organizational, like say federal government, to the individual. I mean, it can go all the way to the individual, right? In an ecosystem, the area of study. And so there's a bunch of factors for it. These are just a couple of them. Under developing capacity, there's a bunch more factors that matter for adaptive governance. I'm not going to list them all here. I can point you to papers. It's much more interesting to do that. Let me just list it during a talk or read it off. So develop capacity. Things like bridging organizations. What are they? They're things like NGOs. A university can be a bridging organization. And what do? They help, let's say like in the project I'm going to tell you about, it helped resolve conflicts, monitor, the multi-scale management entities, because entities are operating at multiple scales, federal, state, local. Okay, makes sense. And then facilitate rapid communication between the entities that are operating at different scales. Okay, so there are some critical elements. There's more, but these are for adaptive management and adaptive governance. Monitoring, I made that point, I think, pretty strongly. And you also want to monitor the implementation and the management policies, as rigorously as the initial formation of the policies, right? So you're doing it through time, the structured iterative process and decision points, right? And so you're adaptively assessing the process in a structured iterative process. Okay. Okay, so now this is where my thinking is now. Because if you can look at my stuff for the past probably 10, 15 years, I've been advocating, or I used to advocate for like more broad scale legal reform, because like I said, I started having a systems perspective a long time ago, and then I went to law school and I realized, well, they don't care about that. The law doesn't care about systems for this. The Endangered Species Act, or Clean Water Act, or Clean Air Act. There's very little systems considerations within there, and that's a real problem when you're trying to manage ecosystems. Okay, in fact, what we've had to cobble ecosystem management together through the Endangered Species Act, and that has its own bugaboos and barriers in there that makes it challenging. And so for years I did that, and then I came to a point where I realized, nobody's going to do this. And then not only that, it was good, like academic scholarship and all, but nobody's going to do it. And furthermore, we might not want to do it because we're lucky we have the Endangered Species Act right now, actually, because we might not have anything at all, depending on the political environment at that time, right? You're not going to get the Ecosystem Management Act. I'd love it, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon. So you might erode. We already have this, the principle of non-regression. And so then my thinking is shifted to, and I'll say it different, like it's mine untapped capacity. It's ridiculous. That's what I said in the paper. What that means is looking at statutes, or looking at case law, and looking at the language and figuring out ways to spin it, right? Looking for flexibility and create, and at least to creatively use the language that already exists. For example, the Clean Water Act. We did this, and I'll show you the project in just a minute. Basically has language that says protect water quality, right? Well, we use green infrastructure. Rain gardens, constructed wetlands. I'll show you some other stuff. For urban green transformation in cities, right? So that's a pretty big jump from that, but we were able to do that because we're looking for this flexibility within the existing language, and that's where I'm at with stuff these days. Sure. And then so resilience governance, this is how I characterize it. This is, I guess, my thing with this these days. Because it really brings in law. And a lot of governance folks don't care for that because they don't have training in law, they're social scientists. But I didn't come to governance. I was a trained governance person. I was trained in law, policy, ecology, and anthropology. So I'm a hybrid, so my perspective is different than say just like being trained in one individual discipline, right? So because of that, you get kind of a mix of things. And I think it's a good thing, but it's also, it makes me more of a generalist than say a specialist. So maybe you're thinking about similar things yourselves, who knows? So law and accountability, you need these things. Adaptive management fits very well for that because it can pass legal scrutiny because of the things I told you about. There's monitoring and there's a structured iterative process. There's on the front end, you're doing things like conceptual models and simulation models and, convening stakeholder workshops and stakeholder outreach, and also outreach to neighborhoods and citizens in the areas in which you are dealing with, right? So there's input, right? And because of that, it has a greater chance of passing legal scrutiny. Intermediaries, I said bridging organizations, NGOs, but then there's networks, and networks are informal. Like right now, we're all in a network in this room. It's informal. Like when we leave this room, the network's gone, unless you decide you met somebody in here you keep in touch with or whatever. So, but networks are critically important because with those networks, there's informal relationships that you have with people at different organizations and at different scales. It's like the grease that keeps the machine going. And then matching organizations to the appropriate scale, I think that's a big problem too, because let me think of an example of that. Oh yeah, okay. So for instance, endangered species act. Well, going back in the day with my turtle stuff, got me thinking about this stuff back here. I find manatees and sea turtles with bullets in their heads, and I'd be like, why would somebody do that? This is so horrible. Well, you know why? Because if you get rid of the sea turtles and the manatees, then there's no regulation, and the crabbers don't have to worry about the feds messing with them or having any federal presence at all. So it's like a way. So that's an undesirable consequence of the Endangered Species Act. So but when they found that I was a gator, that was at the University of Florida, they hated me when they thought I was a fed. So they're scale matching. And that's kind of silly, but it's true to an extent. You gotta have this scale matching. You have to, I talk about it these days in a much more sophisticated way. That's when I started really thinking about it. I said, wow. So if I'm a fed, they hate me, but if I'm a gator, they like me. So you gotta kind of figure out ways to ingratiate yourself with, the folks that you're dealing with, particularly if they're hostile. And they hate us. So, in fact, the line was, oh yeah, what are you doing? I was like, oh, we're studying sea turtles. Oh yeah, I hate those turtles. Except there was effing turtles. I was like, sorry, man. What did he go, yeah, why? And he's, well, they ate all my crabs. He's like, how? Well, they smashed their heads into my crab caps. The crab. Like, I mean, you're getting outsmarted by a thing that has a brain the size of like an 8. No, a crab. Just saying. So Panicky, I'll talk about that. It's another like I didn't come up with the word. I think it's kind of ridiculous to start, but it does matter. Multi-scale ecosystem, that's what it is. Okay, so transformation, I said it, but then here's my definition now, my working definition. I'm not gonna read it, but a regime, that's a new state configuration. Like I said, the best way to think about it is like you think it in terms of like you have a coastal system, right? And adaptation is no longer working. Transformation is not something you really want to do. I mean, it takes on, I'll tell you that there's a whole bunch of factors, but it really is highly risky. And unfortunately, moving forward, the way I see things going, I mean, probably in my lifetime now, this rate, I didn't think it was going to be. But some of these strategies are going to have to be adaptation already, obviously, right? But transformation is going to happen too, in coastal zones for sure. So, and then the next thing is managed retreat, and then transformation. That's just managed retreat, get out. And we can see that happening. And I'll just give you this aside. Like for instance, in Florida, where I'm at now, I mean, I saw that the state insurance is $15 billion in debt. Yeah. And then Ian hit last year, right? Hurricane Ian hit Fort Myers area. I mean, I live in a condo, they raised the exoskeleton for the building on my individual, doubled the insurance. Brendan Maples told me that they had now an $80,000 deductible on their home insurance for not like a very big house, like 1,200 square feet. The insurance industry is taking care of the managed retreat for us. So there's that. Okay, so here's the US. You probably know anyway, but here's Ohio, you might not know that. Here's Ohio, very exciting. This is Cleveland. And this is Lake Erie. Okay, here's Lake Erie. And here's Cleveland. See it? And then, so Lake Erie is huge. Yeah, if you've never been there, I mean, it's massive. It's really beautiful, actually. It's a huge freshwater sea. It's not like it's a freshwater sea. And so here's the problem, or why we got involved, EPA, Office of Research and Development, Ryan, is that you have this issue with combined sewers. I'll explain it real quick. Combined sewers, historically, back to the Romans, they were good. They would get water quickly away from cities, so you wouldn't have flooding and allow for disease and these sorts of things, right? But the problem is, the way it works is when you have these massive rain events or a bunch of snow melting, or ice melting, whatever. These combined sewers, when they get overwhelmed, they blast out everything untreated without any treatment plants. Okay, and this is in older cities in the U.S. it's an issue, like the Northeast and the upper Midwest. And so, well, I mean, I think you know what this is, don't you? We're going to talk about wastewater. That's what we're talking about. Include these flips, and this is clearly the air. So this is the issue. So it's a massive human health and environmental issue. So that's why we got involved, because it's been a problem in a lot of the cities for many years, and the violations of the Clean Water Act. And so one of the ways we want to deal with it is, and this is why transformation was able to go in these places, because things were so bad. That's when transformation comes in. Cleveland, this is 10 years ago, long 13 years ago, we're overall when this was happening. Here's the city, the gray is the city, okay? And so the green is the existing green space, which is nice. There's some really nice existing green space, but then the red, those are vacant lots or vacant parcels, right? And that means that all these areas either completely vacant, they've been bulldozed, or it's empty houses or empty businesses. And this happened, Cleveland was in decline probably since the 50s, industrial decline, but then the mortgage crash of 2008, which happened around the world, had global ramifications, really hit places like Cleveland, Detroit, and some of these other Rust Belt cities, just my hometown, West Virginia, crashed too. These were areas that had industrial bases that were already in decline, and then, they just got crushed after that. But you can see it's an incredible amount of vacant lots of vacancy. And so what does that mean? So that's bad, right? But it's also good because it's an opportunity for urban green transformation. And why? Because this land now was valueless. It was worth $0. So it was a blight. It was grown up. You have these empty buildings, blight buildings that you're having tons of crime. I mean, there was garbage and needles and crime. It was just horrible. I remember I got up there, I was like, how the hell did I get into this? I studied sea traps. Freaking, Cleveland? It is? Something wrong? Anyway, so the point being, this is the abandoned building. This one looks like it's occupied, but then, these two delivery houses there. I mean, they're gone. And it's in an area. Yeah, so this is it. So this is the raw material for urban green transformation in Cleveland, Ohio. 35 feet width, 125 feet long. Vacant lots. That's been bulldozed, obviously. Okay, so with respect to green infrastructure, well, what is it? Well, it's rain gardens, it's constructed wetlands, it's urban prairies, it's wildflower gardens, it's trees, parks, so it can be human-made or it can be nature, right? So that's what it is. And what are the benefits of it? Well, one, if you're putting it in the ground, it's cheaper. I don't have that there. I should probably put that. But it's cheaper. I think EPA probably like that. Well, you can't be saying those things. So anyway, all right. So, but you have reduction in runoff line. What does that mean? It means that keeping water out of the sewers because it's being routed into these rain gardens into vacant lots. So that's reducing through time if you're able to scale it up enough. Those big plumes, I showed you, right? Increases detention capacity, detaining water into the lots, right? And restoration of the hydrologic cycle. Co-benefits, things like aesthetics, they look really nice if they're done well. recreational opportunities that can be linked with green space. How am I going?
About 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Okay, so then, and then pollinators, right? That's really important. Hopefully you all know that. I mean, pollinators are in decline globally. So this is critically important to try to create habitat that's attractive. Particularly urban areas. I mean, why not? It's not being used anyway. So this is what it looks like. I'll start picking up the pace. This is not grown out yet. I wanted to see the structure. So this is when it's, dug out, then you put in some, materials that are good for infiltration and detention, right? Plants start to grow up. Then you have this this green space that's like a lovely land, this is a walking trail here, right? And then this is a curb cut. So the water comes off of the street, instead of going into the sewer, it goes boom into the rainbow. All right, so this was conducted in the Slavic village, and it really wasn't wild. They had a Polish deli there that ended up closing by the end of the project. The sign was in Polish. The staff didn't even speak English, it was great. I mean, it was terrific. They had a Slovenian community center, a Czech community center, a Polish community center. Wow. I mean, I had experienced that sort of thing, so it's cool to see. But anyway, a little side there. Phase one, collected baseline data on soils, hydrologic data, pollinators. Okay. That's critical, right? Because you're going to do adaptive management. Well, you got to have baseline, because otherwise, what are you gauging things from? Control sites and treatment sites. That just means some vacant lots weren't touched, and some handwriting gardens. Okay, so we also had partners. This was essential. This is really a weird kind of shift for EPA, and I was glad to be part of it because I didn't think we would do so. Because typically, it's been command and control, like the thing I told you about, like the manatees and turtles, right? So it's like basically, you will not do this, you will not do that, and people react to that. They don't like Americans in particular don't like control things. So anyway, so we partnered with the Cleveland Botanical Garden, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, Ohio State University, the Slavic Village Development Corporation. There's a bunch. I acknowledge them at the end, but a bunch of different entities in Cleveland because we weren't there. I was based in Cincinnati. That's another factor. So we put 12 rain gardens into the vacant lots. Botanical garden ones and sewer district ones. And then the plants, we had input from stakeholders and citizens because we wanted them to like what was going to come up and be cool with it. See what I mean? Because that matters. Because if you don't have buy-in, people are going to be mad and they might talk about that. So, but they also had to be good for provisioning of these inclusive services, detaining water, keeping it out of the sewer, and also for the flowers had to be good for attracting the pollinators. At Ohio State University, they planted like another 30 vacant lots in an array around ours. But they didn't really do it. They just tilled the vacant lots and then put in some plants. They didn't make rain gardens. They were just trying to attract beneficial pollens. The technologists told me there. They didn't like it when they called the bugs. All right, so community engagement and input. Because there's a trade-off between what citizens want and what's best to get, to attract pollinators, right? So why? Because we wanted the people to stay engaged. Because, the worst thing, they might cut some of the plants down. And that did happen, not to us, but that happened to the Ohio State people because they didn't actually try to engage with people initially. And then they got the plants chopped down. So then they start talking to people. I was like, you might want to try to tell people what you're doing. Because that's insulting. But anyway. So now there's two different types of rain gardens. So the botanical garden ones, these are real simple. You can see it's a real basic one. It's just dug out and then like some sediments or substrate. It's the word I'm looking for. You get it. It's good for water detention, good for plants. Anyway, it's the soils that are good for that. Okay. And then this is one of the sewer districts. These you can see had the difference is this is way more expensive. It wasn't that much more effective. The effectiveness was very similar, but they both had engineering specifications. Okay, that's important to note. But then the sewer district spent a bunch of cash on landscape architects. And it is true, when these are grown out, it looks a lot better. It looks really nice. But was it worth the cost? You have to, you have to balance it, right? So because the aesthetics does matter. I mean, I think the aesthetics does matter. Especially when you're really economically depressed, like really, tough neighborhood. And suddenly you have like flowers. I know it seems slim, it's true. Like flowers and things are green. So wow, it's like you feel like lighter. It's weird. Anyway, but especially in Cleveland. Anyway, so here's the study area. From this is 10 blocks. So the orange and the yellow, sorry. Yeah, yellow and green, those are the different types of gardens. And the trees obscure, you can see. And the orange, these are you guys, the orange are the controls. It's making lots, which is monitoring. And then, so we had some tremendous monitoring. Okay, these are the right here, these are groundwater wells. You can see there's tons of them, just great. Okay, weather stations, here, they're counting, you know, like evapotranspiration, precipitation, other stuff, temperature. What else we had? Oh yeah, we had plumes on the curb cuts, you know, it's basically like a little flapper thing that measures the amount of water coming in. Soil moisture monitoring in place too. Oh yeah, and see, the pipes run this way, see, to this big pipe. It's not big, but this is a bigger pipe, the main one. So we have in-pipe monitoring above and below the site, right? I think that's it. Yeah, there might be, I think that's all the stuff we have, that's the last stuff. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy, but we know how to do it now. That's the trick. You do it once, and to navigate that process, but that was a challenge. Okay, so what are the positives? There's this adaptive element. And that tremendous monitoring infrastructure we have in place gives you the capacity for adaptation and or transformation moving forward. The negative, I was based in Cincinnati, and this project was in Cleveland, 4-hour drive. I was getting up there maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I think I'm proud of the way it turned out, but I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I think it could have been better. And I think that if I'd been based in Cleveland, not that I wanted to be, but it can sometimes better. But anyway, it could have been better, because it would have had time to be more involved in the project and develop some of the stuff I'll talk about in a second, which is this. Well, let me show you some cool pictures. More pictures. Yeah. That's one of my postdocs, former postdocs. But this is like a rain garden grown out, starting to bloom. Okay. And this is a really cool feature. This one is on 5 vacant lots. And there's actually here's like it's an old railway, so it's a rails to trails conversion. So it's a walking, biking, jogging trail. It's right along the city, but this thing is moved out. It's private. I want you to see it again, the structure and sort of things, right? And whoever's house that is, pretty lucky, because it's a really nice feature. And this is okay. So we try to figure out how to deal with aesthetics. I talked to some economists, like how can we assess, aesthetics? Like, well, you can do some anonymous pricing. I think that's right. It's wrong, so correct it. So you need years of data on home prices change. We didn't have that time. We needed to know something. So I was like, okay, fine. The only way we're going to show this now is let's just show pictures. This is 2010. Okay. And I wish I had more, but because I didn't think about this back in the day. Didn't start taking pictures of all the trash and needles and stuff. I'm not making it up, it was crazy. I mean, it's like walking into lots of like watching out, make sure needles poke through your shoe and stuff. It's crazy. To this, boom, exact same spot. See, isn't it nice? See, the aesthetics matter. See, gotcha. See, nice. So you get some funky art stuff, and the main thing is you got your curb cuts. They're taking the water off the streets and into these rain gardens. There's more of it. It's exciting. Then you have these like little features along the streets, these little streetscapes, right? So it's a nice place to sit. Some flowering trees. And then boom, this kind of guy. Really pretty, I think. And then like a bunch of these, like these little pocket wildflower gardens, which were really nice too. And guess what? They're great for attracting pollinators. And prairies. Where's corridors? Corridors. Right. They're not quite connected yet, but the pieces are being put in place. Yeah. So you have like bat and bird houses, right? And then green space. And then some lovely like murals. None of the stuff is there. I mean, it was just shocking later. And then there's one of our weather stations. Anyway. I need more pictures in the past, but I don't have them. All I can show is that one. And the whole place, it wasn't just because it was a gray sky. It really was I mean, there was empty houses, burned out houses everywhere. And through time, they had to demolish it, right? Because it's, it was becoming really dangerous. And people like at one point, somebody threw a body in their helmets. It's just nuts. You know, there was a lot of crazy stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about Panoply. How are we on time? What are we doing?
10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, fine. Okay. All right, so this will help you understand. Okay, so Panoply is I come up with that term, it's jargon, but it means Pan, the Greek god of nature, and then Arche or Archos is rules, so it's nature. Okay, so what it really is that it's the ecosystems operate at multiple scales, you know, all the way to the global scale, right? So in this case, for this urban example, we're talking about from the parcel scale, vacant lot, that's I showed you 35 feet, 125 feet to the parcel scale, to the neighborhood scale. You know, the trick was, can we do a transformation at the parcel scale? Because initially, my collaborator on this was a soil scientist, a hydrologist, and he was a rain garden dude, the guru in that stuff. I didn't know if it worked when I started. I said, rain garden? You mean that thing on the side of the road? All right. So, and as you can tell, I bought it. Point being is that he's like, oh, let's do the whole city at once. I said, no way, I'm not signing up for that, because that's a failure when you have it. Because that management run in those ways, they tried it before with the Everglades, failed. Tried it with the Grand Canyon, failed. That's Lance. Okay. So I said, no, we'll start small. I'm going to take the lessons I learned from this thing, this particular conceptual model, and start small. And then if you can reach a critical threshold, you jump across the threshold and scale up to neighborhood scale. But you have to do it slowly and with intention in a structured iterative process. Okay. And so parcel scale, neighborhood scale, city scale. Multiple scales. And you say, what's a city? No, it's an urban ecosystem. It's actually an ecosystem, just some, you know, asphalt on it, because it's subject to the rules of nature, because it's nested within the biophysical environment. Make sense? And yeah, this is just, you know, stylized. You can, all the red I showed you, if you convert all that, it wouldn't look like this, but it just gives you an idea of the kind of thing that, and it's also important to note, well, I'll finish talking about my part and I'll tell you. Okay, so we did soils, basis for lot neighborhood scale transformation, aesthetics, water, lot scale, neighborhood scale was limited by the curb cuts. We weren't able to get as many curb cuts as well by the time my role in the project. The thing is with EPA, we're on like 4-year cycles. We were able to keep this going for 7 or 8 years, which was a miracle, because they just don't allow it. Because think about this, the political cycles, right? So it makes it difficult to run long-term projects, but others, you know, kept it going to sewer district, but our role on it. And so there's different priorities. That was the other thing, the competing priorities from different organizations, right? They have different pots of monies, different agendas, right? And pollinators, this was an irritant, but I love this premise because this is like one of the bugaboos of field work. We had a master's student from Ohio State, it was being fun. He needed to finish her degree, right? It was taking too long to get the rain gardens, and she hadn't done any field work. So we finally got the rain gardens in the ground, took, you know, a year longer than expected. We get them in, they planted, and she thanked them when the plants just, the shoots start coming up. They're not even flowering yet. Well, no kidding, there's no pollinators. There's no flowers. Why don't your honeybees don't like leaves? But she had no choice. It's not her fault. She had to go do her field season. But that's the day we have that. So okay. So lessons learned, transformative governance came out of this. And it's similar factors to adaptive governance, but it requires more. This is the important stuff. This is from the policy days. See, it's not all gone. So there's still policy there. Framing and agenda setting. Okay. Increased risk tolerance, significant monetary and non-monetary investment, and shifts in power and social interactions. Okay. We'll pick up the pace. Okay, so this is how I see it at this stage. You know, how to do this is how about ecosystem management from my perspective? How about that? Law sets the stage and the rules of the game. And it's not just the enabling legislation, like I said, you have to explore the flexibility of the law so that you can be creative, right? Mine that untapped capacity. So I will use that, but that's what it is. You're trying to find this untapped capacity. It's already there. It's lurking. And there's potential there. Okay. And then leadership, let's see, the network, I told you about that. Critical to develop on the front end. You get to meet people, right? Gives you a better chance of finding champions. What is a champion? Well, I'll tell you in a second. Leadership, and when I understood it from the literature before I actually tried to do one of these things on the ground, leadership was just like, you had to have like one leader. Well, that's BS. You need to have multiple leaders and multiple organizations operating at different scales. That's my perspective on this from having done one of these things on the ground. This one, this massive one for years. Not in size, but in terms of like the effort and scope. And then champions, those are the types of people that you have to identify. And those are the people who actually really care. They're not just there, they care about the project. They care about it and they have skin in the game. This matters to them because when the things get difficult, and it did for us, they got very challenging times where we thought the project was going to die. There were people who really cared and helped us keep going. And it wasn't EPA people, it was people at the NGO, the Slavic Village Development Corporation, which they're incredible. The Cleveland Botanical Garden, so anyway. And then communication, I mean, this is I think, and not emphasizing that, it's so important. You have regular chats and share information, calls and emails and meetings, all sorts of community outreach, right? But look, this is stuff, and you can sneer at it, but I know it matters. You know what matters? Happy hour matters. Happy hour or softball feeling great. But some way that you engage people that you're working with outside of work, so you get to know all that. What does that do? Through time, I'm not saying it's a there's a magic potion for it or whatever, but it can help you develop trust through time, right? So you can identify folks that actually really care about your mutual interest, blah, 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 blah. And there's no way to quantify that I know. That's where like EPA gets crabby with me, because a lot of this you can't quantify. But that's so it goes, All right, so no magic. This is really important too, because I'm gonna switch gears in a second. There's no magic bullet, blueprint, or recipe for success. You know why? Because you're dealing with living systems, and there's always going to be a fundamental level of uncertainty you cannot reduce. Okay, but you probably for folks in this room that's apparent, but into the greater world out there, it's not. Get outside the bubble and check it out. You'll be shocked at how little they know. So you need a mix between tailor-made and recipe options, and then the multi-scale governance. Right? It's based on canopy. I don't like the canopy word turns people off. I didn't come up with it. Like I said. And so, but it incorporates already established standards and regulations. That's important too. But look for, like I said, you have waterfall standards, but look for that flexibility and that untapped capacity within the existing law. Okay. All right. Now, no, I'm kidding. Why did I do this? Okay, so we're switching to coral reefs. That's what I'm doing now. I don't have anything to report. I'm just going to show you a couple nice pictures because who doesn't like to see that? So I'm running a project in Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands now. I'm still with EPA research and development. I'm using basically the same ideas. Not rain gardens, but what we might. Rain gardens might be a factor because we have sewer issues in Puerto Rico. There's combined sewer, where the septic tanks and their sewage is running off and it's high, and guess what? Nitrogen. And nitrogen eats the skeletons of the corals. So rain gardens might be a factor in here. So here we go. That's coral reef. That's the US. Here's Puerto Rico and USVI. So I said, yeah, Puerto Rico and USVI is what I'm running now. But I'm doing it from afar. I know I said distance isn't a kind of body of a choice. They're not paying for my travel. So anyway. Yeah. And that's cool, bro. The point being is that the Caribbean reefs, if you're not familiar with them, they're typically in really shallow water. 40, 50 feet deep as they go. Right? And so they're subject to all kinds of problems, sedimentation, runoff from the roads, non-point source pollution, which would be high phosphorus, right? And then, like I said, the high nitrogen coming off of the septic tanks and bad sewer systems, combined sewers, and also just like really horrible water and sewer infrastructure. So those are massive issues. The green infrastructure might matter. Actually, probably will. We're not there. I mean, I'm just showing you this stuff because we're slowly ramping this thing up. Collecting data. So we have EPA divers collecting data. Then you have some of these automated sensors collecting data. And then there's like, the drone guys playing from the air. And then there's secondary data. And so that's all being cooked into a multivariate spatiotemporal analysis, right? It's a resilience analysis, right? Of coral reef business in the Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands. And once we're done with this one, and that will then be translated into management guidance and recommendations. Micro. Okay, and so there's this old film here, late 60s or early 70s, think globally, act locally. Now, it's think globally and locally, act locally and globally. That's what it really is. Up and down, up down the scales, because you can don't think that it has to be some sexy big project at the UN level or the federal level or some huge big project. Actually, that's most likely going to fail. You'll get a lot of attention at first, but it's going nowhere for the most part. Start small, build up. All right, so let me acknowledge these are the folks from the Cleveland project. a bunch of organizations I told you about, Botanical Garden, USGS, anyway, I won't name them all, but it's important that they're all acknowledged. My former postdocs who've moved on. And then shameless self-promotion. The best part of every talk, you should do it yourself. This is the book that came out recently. And then some recent pubs. Anyway, that's what I got. Thanks.
We've got some time for questions for Ahjond. Anybody's got any?
That's fine. I mean, yeah, sure.
Maybe a more broad and potentially hypothetical question, but how do you balance trade-off in, when you have two acts such as, the Clean Water Act and like maybe the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and you do something that may, violate the other? For example, here's where the hypothetical comes in. Maybe you're building these gardens in Cleveland and you have migratory birds that stop over in those locations that are then eaten by feral cats, or they collide in windows or something else.
Very scenario.
So how do you balance the trade-off that may come with, two acts that could potentially be, competing against each other?
It's gonna be the case law. And I'm not up to speed on, Migratory Bird Act and Clean Water Act in terms at this stage of my career. Law now is just one of the arrows in my quiver. I mean, I'm just a generalist these days, but that's what really would determine is the state of case law in 2023. Because there might be new law on the books, that has been decided in some case that is, enforceable and holds precedence. And I just don't know. That's what would determine conflicts between different acts. Does that make sense?
So with the transformation of social ecological system and people that you've been working with, have you heard of the resilience to impact direct framework?
What's nice? Brian Chapman, he's part of that group. And that's all that paper. Actually, I did read it. I think it's actually real similar to what we've already talked about. They just kind of repackaged it. I'd have to look at it again. That was when I read that paper, I was like, they repackaged. That's what I thought. But maybe I'm wrong, but that was my first read. So yeah, but I'd be happy to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, and I was just curious because it's very, from my read as well, a lot of very similar.
You think it's the same thing? They just repackaged it?
Is that direct that people are still getting their head?
I mean, resist, accept, direct. Is that what it is? Yeah, the direct is, I mean, that's transformation.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what.
yeah.
Further down.
Resist
Transformation
is
of
gonna be important. Would that be preservation? No mitigation. Resist would be preservation.
preservation.
Yeah, which,
Yeah.
good luck with that. I mean, with non-stationarity, I mean, good luck. I mean, it's not gonna happen. I mean, I think for that better, that's mitigation. Where do you go back to? What's your baseline? What baseline go back to? Right? So, oh, we're gonna go back to historic baseline where ecosystems were pristine. Really? When was that?
I think in a nutshell, you just captured like management. At least in the West. Yeah, thanks.
So does the work in Cleveland, do other cities pick up on that? Does EPA try and transfer that to other places so they see where it works and then I can't go. Like, do they go to Buffalo or they start trying to student in other places?
Yeah, there has been engagement with it. On to other cities. Now, the thing is, our role, like I said, research development in Cleveland is basically gone. But it doesn't matter because my understanding is that the sewer district and universities and NGOs, they're doing different stuff. We had this water focus, right? This EPA and we Clean Water Act, and that's why we got involved, right? Others didn't care. The Botanical Garden cared about flowers and pollinators, right? So that's what their pot of money was. We'll see the social-ecological development corporation, the NGO, they cared about aesthetics. They wanted to look nice because they want people to come back to the neighborhood, have green, green space. And so they had these different competing things. So The water thing is still, the sewer district still has to deal with that. That's their problem, obviously, because they're under consent decree. It's like $5 billion price tag for the gray. Yeah, like that for a city like Cleveland with a massively declining population base. Imagine how popular that is. So, I mean, and that's in Detroit and Gary, Indiana, and Buffalo, and I mean, tons of cities in the upper, Midwest that are not in great shape, and in the Northeast that are not in great shape. So it's a big issue. And it's still happening. We were able to, some of the stuff happened in Cincinnati from the work we did. And then like my colleague, Bill Schuster, he's not at Wayne State University in Detroit. He left EPA. He did, these soil, he was, I don't know, how he had his, he was an urban soils guy. So he did these soil surveys around the whole country. He characterized all the soil orders around North America or in US territories. So because of that, there was a bit of contagion with that, because then you have, if your urban soils are characterized, and if they're good for rain gardens or not. Because it's like, say, for instance, the city of Philadelphia, I think they changed this, but years ago, what they decided to do, years ago, I know this is what they decided to do. So, well, we're not going to do any improvements on these vacant lots. That's going to be the infrastructure, it'll just infiltrate. No, they didn't, because they were almost as impermeable as freaking parking lots, right? Because they've been so compacted with all kinds of people from the demolitions and everything. So then they had to go back like, oh, it's not, it didn't work. So we have to, but Cleveland, it's sand dunes. And you imagine, I didn't know that either. Think of this massive, it was built on massive sand dunes. These amazing, gorgeous, you can imagine what it looked like. Incredible sand dunes. So when you get just below the soil pack, right? You get down to a certain level between big cores, it's sand. Yeah. But certain areas are better suited to it than others. Yeah.
So is the water clear?
I mean, not yet, because like I said, it's
How long does that take?
gonna take a long time. because it's not accepted, because the sewer district, think about it, it's all civil engineers. They hated this kind of green hippie solutions. They're like, yeah, whatever, hippie. It's like, we know how to do this. We can take this pipe, we can calculate this, but we know that your green stuff's a little too fuzzy. We don't know how it's gonna do. Is it gonna make mosquitoes? Is it gonna cause flooding basement? No, it's not. But then what the started turn the tide was, we showed that it was cheaper. And also you can see how pretty the next things look. People like that. The people in the neighborhood that started to like it. And they can, get their own vegetables too. They like that. Vegetable and fruit right there. But people started to like it. First they were hostile to it. But then it's like, kind of nice. And then you see the opinions start to change. So, but yeah, as far as like cleaning water, that's gonna take. Yeah, you have to convert, you have to reach a critical mass of lots, right? Of space to keep the water out of the sewer. And I think it will happen eventually, but it's going to be years of work. It'll get there. It's still happening to an extent. It's just, I
think all the other benefits are big. Getting rid of urban.
Yeah, it is, but then
They upper Midwest cities. I used to live in Toledo.
So Toledo, the city has similar issues. Yeah, so, it will get there, and I think Toledo's in a consent decree too, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's even tougher for them, because it's even smaller. Cleveland has some real money, there's some foundation, the Rockefellers were based there. Cleveland has some old school money that would, some foundations that dumping money to this, into the botanical garden. That Cleveland Botanical Garden, if you ever go to Cleveland, it's spectacular. It was beautiful, go look at it, trust me, I never would have guessed. Anyway.
Anybody else? All right, well, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I came at these policies everywhere, right? The way you're describing them, starting with the lot level, the neighborhood and city, really is a microscopic version of policy infusion. He is stressing the number of them, like is at the state and that's the national, so.
Yeah, I remember that. Who taught that? That guy from Burn Booth.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He was really good. I liked him. That's why.
It was good.
He was good. He was really good.
So good advertisement, courses are offered in policy studies, they're relevant. You're afraid to look in LIBOR and policy studies.
Don't be afraid of politics.
We have program as well.
Alan can rich for that too. So Alan's got his policy chops too. So well, thanks, John. We really appreciate it. We've got a bunch of grad students, and if anyone wants to chat with us for coming before that, please stick around. But thanks again for coming out. We appreciate it.
That's not this.
Yeah.